States economy and for the world's reserve currency, which is the dollar, then we need to be there and we need to understand it first and best. So we're working hard on it. There's a group of major central banks that have gotten together to share understanding of the technology and the cyber implications, cybersecurity implications, the economic implications, the financial inclusion implications. It is a big, complex problem, and it's one that we take very seriously. And again, I think it's our obligation to understand it well and not wake up
one day and realize that the dollar is no longer, world reserve currency because we just missed a technological.
So we're not going to let that happen. At the same time, there's some very serious questions that have to be answered before we would want to implement central bank digital currency.
In one case, if you create a central bank digital currency, you can know every payment by everybody.
Nice for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your patience with my ability to use this machine. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like everyone else on this committee, our hearts go out and our prayers to the Andy Barr and his family. A very tough day. Chair Powell, I appreciate you being with us here today, albeit virtually. And even more so after my recent experience trying to get my mute button fixed, I think the House should be back here in Washington doing our jobs. The opportunity to connect with you digitally has brought to mind several topics related to fintech that I've been working on, including as ranking member on the fintech task force of this committee. Technological innovations. As late as last year, you told my colleague, Representative French Hill from Arkansas, that you were following central bank digital currencies closely, but that the Fed was not currently developing a central bank digital currency. You said, quote, characteristics that make the development of central bank digital currency more immediately compelling for some countries differ from those in the US, close quote. It is true other countries utilize digital cash at a higher rate than the US. However, our technological edge has kept us the predominant world leader we are today for at least several decades. And I think the recent pandemic has actually shown that this is an important step that we need to make regardless. What substantive recent actions has the Fed taken to understand and experiment with this technology? And I guess, can you disclose any current considerations or questions you or the Fed have on the concept of a central bank digital currency?
I'd be glad to. So we think I think central banks everywhere, all around the world, are looking at this, and we owe it to the public that we serve to be up to speed and if this is something that is going to be good for the United States economy and for the world's reserve currency, which is the dollar, then we need to be there and we need to understand it first and best. So we're working hard on it. There's a group of major central banks that have gotten together to share understanding of the technology and the cyber implications, cybersecurity implications, the economic implications, the financial inclusion implications. It is a big, complex problem, and it's one that we take very seriously. And again, I think it's our obligation to understand it well and not wake up one day and realize that the dollar is no longer world reserve currency because we just missed a technological change. So we're not going to let that happen. At the same time, there's some very serious questions that have to be answered before we would want to implement central bank digital currency.
That's great. It's good to hear. It's good to hear that you're leaning in. In the recent report issued by the Digital Dollar Project and reflected in some of the congressional proposals that are out there, there seems to be a recognized need, agreement, that the private sector should be involved in the creation of a CBDC. This is either in its development or dispersal. And I guess through the Fed's work and analysis on the topic that you're currently in, what role do you think the private sector would play?
I really do think this is something that the central banks have to design principally, and we don't, the private sector is not involved in creating the money supply. That's something that the central bank does. And I think, I know there are ideas that this should really be the work of a private board. I don't really think the public would welcome the idea that private employees who are not accountable solely to the public good would be responsible for something this important. I mean, once we assess it and decide what to do, it'll be all about the private sector. It has to work through the banking system and through businesses and the economy for individuals and all that. But I think in the first instance, it's got to be the work of central banks.
Which leads me to probably my last question. If the Fed were to adopt a digital currency, should the Fed have the technical capability to deny access to law-abiding citizens for any purpose? And should it oversee or track transactions between private individuals?
Yeah, those are big questions. You've got to, in one case, if you create a central bank digital currency, you can know every payment by everybody. And that's not good. And if you don't know any payments by anybody, then where's your money laundering? So it's a very difficult
Thank
problem.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Powell. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Nicholas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day to you, Chairman Powell. And Andy, your friends are mourning with you, man. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Madam Chair, I want to first begin by thanking you and the committee for drafting this letter on behalf of the committee that we sent to Secretary Mnuchin and to you, Chairman Powell, dated May 13, 2020, particularly addressing the lack of territorial inclusion in the municipal liquidity facility that's being administered by the Fed. More specifically, we write, through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, signed into law on March 27th, Congress instructed the Treasury Secretary to seek the establishment of a facility that would support the market for borrowing by state, municipal, and territorial governments. Despite the clear and unambiguous inclusion of territorial governments in these instructions, the Federal Reserve's Municipal Liquidity Facility, initially announced on April 9th, did not list territories among eligible issuers of debt. Furthermore, despite earlier requests to correct the original announcement, the Fed's subsequent announcement on April 27th significantly expanded the number of eligible issuers that the Municipal Liquidity Facility would support, but continued to exclude territorial governments. Mr. Chairman, earlier in your dialogue with my colleague, Mr. Himes, I quoted you here saying that we're implementing the law that you passed. But the law that we passed in the CARES Act fully includes territories in the Municipal Liquidity Facility, and yet the Fed is excluding territories from being able to access that facility. In response to our letter that we sent to you on May 13th, we got a response 2 days ago on June 15th from you, and the area that you address with respect to that concern, you state, and I quote, "As you know, we are required by law in our emergency lending to be well secured and to protect taxpayers from loss, and we are prohibited from lending to insolvent borrowers. The financial circumstances of the territories are generally inconsistent with these statutory constraints." Now, Mr. Chairman, notwithstanding Puerto Rico's circumstances, Guam is not insolvent. The Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas are not insolvent. American Samoa is not insolvent, and the US Virgin Islands are not insolvent. And so my question is, why are we excluding these territories from being able to access the municipal lending facility?
So as you pointed out, we are, what we put in our letter is really the way the law, we're required to conclude that we're adequately secured, and we have not been able to come to the view that any of the territories would be able to borrow from us, and that there are other government. I don't doubt the need for borrowing, but there are other programs which are better suited to serving the territory's needs.
But the CARES Act specifically authorizes territories to be able to access the municipal liquidity facility. It's very clear in the law, and the rationale for excluding them is not consistent with all of the territories. And I seriously doubt there's some kind